In the November edition of our magazine, Prophecy in the News, on page 5, we have an ad for an incredible book called Nephilim Stargates. We have the author with us today, Dr. Thomas Horn. This is the book. Here's the man. Gary Stearman is here. We're going to have a roundtable discussion on the Nephilim and how they get to planet Earth and what's going on today with UFOs, transgenics. Gary has the first question.
Well, JR, it's my pleasure to introduce Thomas Horn to our TV viewing audience. And let me tell you, this is going to be a great discussion. Hang on every word. Thomas Horn, welcome to Prophecy in the News.
Well, thank you for having me on your program, JR.
And I've got a million questions. I've read the book. It's a fascinating read, and it links a lot of prophetic ideas together that maybe haven't been linked this way before. What's this book about, Tom?
Well, I'll tell you what truly motivated me in this was and we can talk about this if you want to. I started doing some research into some emerging fields of science, transgenics, biotechnology, but I actually was looking for scientific models that might tell us where this technology would lead us. The blending of humans and animals, the creating of modern chimeras.
Yes.
You know, what might from a scientific point of view, what might the benefits to humanity be?
Interrupting a chimera, the idea of linking two different animals together into a single unit, such as the old gods of Egypt, a man's body and the head of a jackal, a chimera.
Well, the scientific community is proud of this mouth with a human ear growing on its back, you know.
Yes.
We can make human ears and put ears back on people. This is basically what we're talking about, isn't it? Transgenics?
Well, yes, certainly that was one of the early experiments that was being done. Now it's much more sophisticated than that. It's grown over the last 10 years in phenomenal ways. But what I could not find were models because the science was emerging so quickly. It's kind of like riding the bicycle while you build it. I mean, they were doing the research before they even knew what the ramifications of it might be, still are. Genetically modified crops are already showing us that they might impact the environment in ways we're not prepared for, but it's not stopping us or corporations from patenting seeds and putting out various kinds of crops. Some crops now that are part animal, crops that have fish genetics in them and things like that.
Now, you're talking opening Pandora's box here, aren't you?
Well, potentially we are. And this is where it went back into history. Was that this Pandora's box had been opened once before, because while I couldn't find models that would say where this may take us, either positively or negatively, we ran into this old story. And we started finding it in cultures around the world about the gods who had come down. And this was told in Greece, it was told in Samaria. There's references to what we believe connects to this in the book of Genesis. There were also other extra biblical or pseudepigrapha books, but some of which are referenced in the Bible, that told this story of these super intelligences who came down. But one of the things that they did, and it seemed that it was required of them to blend the DNA of different species for some purpose that seems to relate to allowing them to incarnate themselves. The story in Greece, Zeus comes down, he marries a woman, or somehow he shares with her DNA, and Hercules, a mighty man of old. The story is told that there was this need to blend between humans and animals. Of course, in Genesis, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took them wives of all, which they would, and after that...
So these stories from Greek mythology of a man who's from the waist down is a horse, or of Pan, who was a man from the waist down was a goat. This is the kind of thing you're talking about here.
This was what I kept running into, and the story that was told, the moral story that was told, was this led to chaos. And it seemed in some cases to almost be like a crude record. In other words, people back then trying to illustrate what had happened. So maybe it's half goat, half man, but the deeper message is there was a blending, a crossing over of the species. And as a Christian and as a former pastor, I had an interest in this because I've always believed that there was a divine order and that God spoke all creation and then breathed into the nostrils of Adam. He gave all these different creations the ability to procreate after themselves, but he ordered that each would recreate after its own kind. So that naturally, a donkey cannot breed with a dog.
Yes.
But scientifically, we're doing it now. And it appeared to me when I started looking at this trail that ancient intelligences had done the same.
Tom, the name of your book, Nephilim Stargates. Quickly, let's define the title, Stargate. And maybe you're thinking of the sci-fi program that's on TV. It's not quite that, but on the other hand, it's not that far away, is it?
Well, first of all, I have to admit that I tried to pick what I thought was a very popular, well-known name that popular culture could identify with the idea that you are creating an opening, a portal.
A portal, a gate through which, what comes through the gate?
Well, even on television, it's aliens. And so I had an interest in that. I also think that there's also a kind of spiritual way to look at this.
Okay.
That this ancient story in the Bible and Enoch and Jasher and other books was that there were these angels who did not want to remain in their plane of existence. And they saw the daughters of women. These daughters of women for them may have been the Stargate, the method through which they left their plane of existence and came into our three-dimensional reality.
Well, now Jude talks about the angels who left their first estate and who are now held in chains of darkness because of that sin. Their first estate, of course, would have been heaven.
Right.
They left that and they came to earth, and they had to come, you're saying, through some sort of portal.
Well, and this is why I think this is key. And actually, to me, this is what solved for me the mystery of the Watchers. Why did they do what they did? Why did they have to blend? Because if you read the whole story from Enoch and Jasher, which is referred to in the Bible, the sin that they committed against the women, they also committed against the animals and even against the plant life, so that eventually all life, all flesh became corrupted on earth. And I've never thought that it's, a good exegesis to think that this corruption was talking about immorality, because a donkey might step on your toe, but we don't think of him as committing an immoral act.
Yes.
The corruption was something else, and it was the corruption of DNA. And through intermarriage and interspecies breeding over a long period of time, what God had created started becoming corrupted, until the point that it was entirely corrupted. In fact, the ancient book of Jasher says, in Jasher 4:18, it says, and after the fallen angels went into the daughters of men, then men began to teach the mixing of creatures of one species with another in order to provoke the Lord. And when I first found that text, I thought, well, it certainly would not have provoked the Lord if you were talking about hybridization, breed one horse with another horse.
Right.
You had to interpret it literally. They began teaching right after the fallen angels went into the daughters of men. They began teaching the blending of one species to another. Why would they have had to do that? That's the answer to the Stargate.
Tom, if you were trying to briefly let people know what your thrust was, what your purpose was in writing this book, what was it exactly?
Well, it was that I stumbled upon what I thought was an explanation for something that I had been curious about for a long time, and that was if the Watchers wanted to come down in the days of Jared on Horeb, why didn't they just come down and mate with these women? Why did they have to tinker with the DNA of both the women? Now, of course, my formal and orthodox education was that this was an attempt to cut off the bloodline of the Messiah, and I still believe that that was true.
Yes.
But what I became intrigued with was, how could this lead to incarnation? Because that was also the story, that these were gods who walked among people. They saw them physically. Now, like today, when we look at ufology, even the best secular writers in ufology, Jacques Vallée, Dr. John Keel, Dr. John Mack, all concluded that whatever was going on with alien abduction phenomenon was similar to biblical demonology and to the history of the Watchers, because there is this need to collect, to harvest DNA of humans, but not just humans. You go to bed one night, you wake up the next morning, and Skippy the horse is out in the field with portions of his face that have been removed with laser precision. There's no footprints coming to him or from him.
No blood.
No blood. And it's happened around the world thousands of times, and no law enforcement agency yet has been able to capture the international blood-sucking cult that's doing this to these animals.
Yes.
But these are happening in UFO flap areas, so that there is a phenomenology that occurred not just in ancient times, but almost appears to also be happening now. So this intrigued me. The bottom line, to answer this question about why I thought I had solved the answer, the question of the Watchers and why they had to do this mingling, was the light came on one day that God had created all intelligent forms of life. All of it dated back to Him. And He had kick-started it, and then put up a barrier between the species in order that each kind reproduce after its own kind. So meaning then that at the moment that the sperm of a dog meets ovum of a dog, and a dog zygote is formed, at the earliest moment of life, the spirit of a dog enters that being. The same thing is true of a human, a horse, any other creature, all dating back to the creation of God. Well, according to Enoch, these Watchers had participated with God in creation. They could not speak into existence like he could, but they knew something about genetic manufacturing. And they knew that in order to create a body for themselves to be incarnated in, they had to create something that God had not made. And that by breaching the species barrier, and this is why God had commanded the species barrier not to be broken, they had created something that was neither animal nor man. If it was part dog and part man, the spirit of a dog would not enter into it. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a man, so the spirit of a man would not enter it. They had made a biological form into which they could incarnate themselves. And then they began procreating, which of course led to the great chaos of the Old Testament. So once I had my mind wrapped around this concept, and I'm trying to explain it in just a few words because I know we have limited time, it really helped me with understanding how what we're doing today in biotechnology may also be opening a gateway now for the return of something that we haven't seen in thousands of years.
Wow. JR, this is fascinating. I have to ask, now we've introduced the word UFO. Do not leave us because we have brought UFO into a Christian conversation. UFOs, call them celestial transportation vehicles. There's biblical evidence that the angels use conveyances. In fact, tell us, Tom, about what you have written concerning angelic technology and the use of technology at that level.
Well, there is a portion of, there was a book just before this called the Ahriman Gate, which was co-written with, my wife wrote it with me. And there is a portion in that book, there's a place in that book where this question is asked: why would angels use flying saucers? I mean,
right.
why? And part of this goes, as you know, to our own Western culture. From the time we're tiny in Sunday school, we have the angels flying around without the use of any kind of equipment.
They have built-in wings.
Yeah, they have built. But there is a character in the book who makes the case that if you look at creation, you note that everything God ever made had an adaptability and an ability to use technology, that He made them intelligent. So whether it's spiders weaving traps or other animals, the things that are invisible are known by the things that we see, the Bible tells us, so that the angels certainly would have had technological knowledge and would have employed it.
And they used it illegally, let's put it this way. In fact, the thrust of Enoch, Genesis speaks about their descent into human form. Peter and Jude speak about it in the New Testament. When they encroached upon planet Earth, they did so illegally.
Right.
Now, the book of Enoch says there are only 200 of them that descended down onto Mount Hermon. I have a feeling that was just the advanced team, you know, and then
Yes.
they brought all the rest of them down.
How true.
Until this world was so corrupt, only Noah was still perfect in his generations, the King James Version puts it. I think that means genetically pure, and he and his family were the only ones God could save.
I believe that, yes.
I have seen the head of a beaver that was so large, and I'm talking about a fossil, so large that the beaver had to be 10 feet long. I've seen the head and horns of a buffalo that was 10 times larger than a modern buffalo skull. It was a skull with the horns. Okay. Is it possible then that these angels, are these fallen angels, the Nephilim or whatever, were genetically manipulating these animals back before the flood, creating these giants?
Yes.
And that today the pure DNA, that which was saved aboard the ark and is roaming around planet Earth today, is what God originally intended. So they're not so big.
Correct. And this forbidden technology, use that term, might also apply to the kinds of biotechnology, because now we're starting to do again what only the gods of mythology or the fallen angels did. Yeah. And so will this open a Pandora's box? Will this take us back the first time by flood, the next time by fire? And also, even when you follow through Nimrod, Genesis 10, and Nimrod began to be a Gibborim. And many scholars believe that the Gibborim are in the bloodline of the Watchers and the Nephilim, that they are the offspring of the Nephilim. What a fascinating statement. Nimrod began to be a Gibborim. I can tell you that recently
In other words, you can take an adult and change their DNA structure, and through some kind of a virus or nanotechnology, they can go throughout the body and change every single cell to be different from the original.
And we have this record that Nimrod became a rebel. At some point, evidently, made decisions. Now, I began to be a diabetic. I was making poor choices about eating, working too many hours, not taking care of myself, and I was genetically predisposed to become a diabetic. It didn't mean I would, but it was in my bloodline. Now, think of Nimrod. He began making changes, and he began to become a rebel, a mighty hunter. And suddenly it says in Genesis 10, he began to be a Gibborim. The very next chapter, what does he do? He sets out to build a tower whose top would reach into Shemayim, the dwelling place of God. I've often wondered if when he began to become something different, were his eyes then suddenly opened to a plane of existence that the Watchers would have been able to see, but had been closed off to humans. And suddenly he goes to a specific place and he starts building a tower. This too could be forbidden technology, because maybe he then suddenly could see into the dwelling place of God. Maybe this was a rebellious act, but he suddenly had this interest in building.
So you're saying that, let's take for example dogs who can smell tumors.
Right.
They have a sense of smell that we don't have.
Correct.
So it's possible that if altered genetically, we could smell tumors, or we could see beyond what our physical eyes see. We could see into the infrared spectrum, or we could see into the ultraviolet spectrum, or even wider than that, and see things that we currently don't know that are there.
That's a brilliant observation.
That's
and
amazing.
You know, the whole transhumanist movement now, they are in love with where biotechnology portends to take us, including opening new modes of perception by integrating our species with the animal kingdom. And Balaam's donkey could see the angel. Balaam couldn't. Animals may be able to perceive levels of reality around us, which for our own protection, God has not allowed us in this condition to see. And so most certainly, we're looking at a technology now that could take us to a point. And if you think about this building a tower whose top would reach into heaven, think about how there is a record that upon tall locations, heaven was attainable. When Jesus returns, his feet will touch the top of the Mount of Olives. Moses goes up upon the Mount of Sinai to communicate with God. The angels descend upon Horeb in the days of Jared. The Watchers do. There is a record, and it's seated deep in our human psyche too, that we go up on high towers to reach God. Why is that there? Because there may be places where if we could see those locations, there are specific locations of entry. This could have been a great rebellious act, and it takes on a whole new prophetic angle when you start thinking about why we're in Iraq, Babylon now, and set up a military presence where we believe was the ancient location of the Tower of Babel.
Well, JR, I'd like to raise a kind of an associated topic. In Genesis 6:4, it says there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that, meaning after the flood, I think. And Jesus made the remark once that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. In other words, they were doing things in the days of Noah that were astounding, and that's a lot of what Nephilim Stargates is about. Tom, the suggestion is that what happened in the days of Noah will come full force in the days just before the second coming of Christ.
That's exactly what I believe. I mean, we're seeing the unfolding of biblical prophecy, sciences that can take us back so that we can accomplish what was once forbidden and what ultimately led to the flood.
Yeah. Now, you call them watchers here. Tell us the origin of the term watchers.
Watchers is a term that Enoch, an extra biblical prophet, used, but who is quoted in the New Testament. The book of Jude and Peter both refer to his writings. And he tells the story of 200 very powerful angels called watchers who came down from heaven. And these were the ones who set about to create the Nephilim.
And what about 2012 here? What's that mean?
Well, the year 2012, because in this book I also talk about some of the belief systems outside of the Christian circle that might somehow harmonize. I wrote a book one time called The Gods Who Walk Among Us, in which I offered a proposition that I saw, as a pastor, I saw some of my kids in church, and they were taking these comparative religion studies at school, and it was messing them up. Because they were getting confused. You know, this religion's no different than that religion because they're all saying much of the same thing. And I put forward a theory that there was an original revelation that came from God. And after the fall, it became splintered and dispersed among the nations, but people kept those traditions and adapted them to their own histories. And they became oral histories.
Now, I think this 2012 here is connected with the Mayan calendar.
The Mayan
Tell
calendar.
us about that.
Right. Well, yeah, December 21st at exactly 11:11 in the year 2012, the Mayan calendar will reach its zenith. That'll be the end of it. It's also the end of the Aztec long calendar. And that is a time in which they believe that their great and terrible god, Quetzalcoatl, is going to, the skies are going to open, or a stargate is going to open. And one theory, a rope ladder is going to descend and he'll come down on. And another theory, however, a winged ship will appear with the return of Quetzalcoatl, the ancient god of the Aztecs and Mayans.
Wow.
Kukulkan to the Aztecs.
Wow.
JR, one thing we must add right here at the end is that Tom has done, I think, remarkable research on the connection between ancient Greek mythology and the Bible, showing how the Bible really reflects what the pagans were talking about as best they could in their histories.
Amazing.
Very good.
Well, thank you.
Well, it's an interesting book. It certainly is. We have just about a minute or so. I think it's important for people to understand that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that He came down to this earth 2,000 years ago and died on Calvary's cross to give us eternal life and to pay our sin debt. So there is a war going on between good and evil, God and the devil, Christ and Antichrist, and these Nephilim are a part of the enemy. Jesus is head of the good guys, and I want you to know that you have a choice to make. It's either for Jesus or against Him. And right now, in your normal human state, you were born in sin with Adam's sin upon you, and so you don't have to make a decision if you want to go to that place where all the Nephilim are going to end up one of these days. But if you want to go to heaven with the rest of us, you need to receive Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. So I encourage you to just pray a simple sinner's prayer. Ask the Lord to forgive you of your sins and to save you. He will, you know. He loves you. Just pray today, will you? And then write us and let us know that you've trusted Christ as your personal Savior. Gary, this book, of course, it will be continued as we continue this interview on our internet site, so be sure and check prophecyofthenews.com. This is J.R. Church. Until next time, keep looking up.